"I thought you'd hang up," she said. Mafia boss dropped his phone and ran through the rain to her. The rain in New Jersey had a way of sounding like gravel thrown against the siding of the house, a rhythmic, abrasive noise that usually kept Samantha Rowe awake well past midnight. She sat at her small kitchen table, the laminate peeling slightly at the edges, wrapping her hands around a mug of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The house was silent, save for the storm outside and the occasional creak of floorboards settling under the weight of the damp air. Upstairs, her teenage brother, Leo, was asleep. She had checked on him twice already, standing in the doorway just to watch the steady rise and fall of his chest. It was a habit she could not break, a lingering scar from the chaos that had consumed their lives a year ago. When her phone buzzed against the Formica table, the sound was sudden and violent in the quiet room. Samantha flinched, her heart hammering against her ribs. The screen lit up the dim kitchen with a harsh white glow. No name appeared, just a string of digits she did not recognize. She stared at it. It was nearly 1 a.m. Nobody called at this hour with good news. Her mind instantly raced to the worst possibilities: creditors, the police, or the shadows from her past finally catching up to the fragile peace she had built. Her hand trembled as she reached out. She told herself it was likely a wrong number or a pre-recorded scam, something impersonal and harmless. She slid her thumb across the screen and brought the device to her ear. She did not speak first. She held her breath, listening to the static on the other end. "Senator." A deep voice rumbled on the other end. It was not a question. It was a command, a voice wrapped in sandpaper and authority, expecting immediate obedience. Samantha blinked, her voice catching in her throat. "Hello?" The silence that followed was heavy. It was not the silence of a disconnected line, but the silence of a predator pausing to assess a sudden shift in the wind. On the other end of the line, sitting in a leather chair in a high-rise penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Luca Moretti frowned. He pulled the phone away from his ear, checking the number he had dialed. He had made a mistake, 1 digit off. He should have hung up immediately. He had a city to run, a syndicate to manage, and a corrupt politician to threaten before the sun came up. But he did not hang up. "Who is this?" Luca asked. His voice was lower now, stripped of the business-like aggression he had started with, replaced by a sharp curiosity. "You called me," Samantha whispered, her hand tightening around the phone. She should hang up. She knew she should. Men with voices like that were dangerous. She knew that better than anyone. But the rain was loud outside, and the house felt terribly empty, and his voice, despite its hardness, felt like a tether to something solid. "I think you have the wrong number." Luca leaned back in his chair. The room around him was expansive and cold, filled with shadows and expensive art that meant nothing to him. He was tired, a bone-deep exhaustion that sleep could not fix. The woman's voice on the other end was soft, trembling slightly, like a bird caught in a draft. It was the polar opposite of the world he lived in, a world of shouting, gunfire, and lies. "You sound scared," Luca said. It was an observation, not an accusation. "It is late," Samantha replied defensively, though she did not lower the phone. "And it is raining. Does the rain scare you?" "No, the thunder does." Luca looked out at the expansive glass wall of his office. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the jagged skyline, but the glass was soundproof. He could not hear the storm. He could only see the violence of it. "I cannot hear the thunder here," Luca said. "It is quiet." "That sounds lonely," Samantha said, the words slipping out before she could check them. Luca froze. Lonely. It was a word nobody dared to associate with Luca Moretti, the head of the family. The man who had taken control after his brother was butchered in the street. He was feared, he was respected, he was hated, but nobody ever looked at him and saw the isolation. "I did not mean to say that," Samantha added quickly, panic rising in her tone. "I am sorry. I should go." "Don't," Luca said. The word was sharp, almost desperate. He cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "Don't hang up. Just stay for a minute." Samantha hesitated. She looked at the dark window of her kitchen. Why? "Because I made a mistake dialing," Luca said, his voice rough, "and because I do not want to call the person I was supposed to call. Tell me about the rain. Tell me what it sounds like." So she did. For the next hour, Samantha Rowe, a florist who spent her days arranging lilies and roses, described the storm to a man who had likely ordered 3 hits that same week. She told him about the leak in the gutter and how the wind howled through the old oak tree in the front yard. Luca listened. He said very little, but his breathing on the other line was steady, a rhythmic anchor that calmed her nerves. When they finally hung up, Samantha stared at the black screen of her phone, feeling foolish. She would never hear from him again. It was a fluke, a glitch in the universe where 2 ghosts crossed paths in the night. She was wrong. The next night, at exactly 11 o'clock, her phone rang. "Did the gutter hold?" his voice asked without preamble. Samantha sat up in bed, clutching the duvet to her chest, a smile, unbidden and terrifying, tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Yes, my neighbor fixed it today." "Good," Luca said. "A man? An 80-year-old man named Mr. Henderson," she corrected. "He used a ladder I told him not to use." "Stubborn," Luca noted. "Brave," she countered. Thus began the ritual. Over the next few nights, the calls became the center of gravity in Samantha's life. Luca was blunt, often dispensing with greetings and diving straight into questions that felt like interrogations, yet lacked malice. He wanted to know everything about her quiet, invisible life. He asked about the flowers she sold, which ones wilted fastest, which ones meant grief, which ones meant forgiveness. He seemed fascinated by the mundane details of a life lived without the constant threat of death. Samantha, however, was careful. She built a fortress of small lies around her history. She told him she was just a shop girl raising a brother. She did not mention the reason she was raising Leo alone, that their parents had died in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving them drifting. And she certainly did not mention the man she had dated 6 months ago, a courier named Danny, who had charmed her with crooked smiles and cash tips, only to disappear one day, leaving behind a terrifying silence and men in dark cars who occasionally drove slowly past her house. She knew the sound of the underworld. She knew the cadence of men who broke the law. Luca sounded like them, yet different. There was a weariness in him that felt safe, like a lion that was too tired to hunt. Luca was equally guarded. When she asked what he did, he gave the standard New Jersey answer. "Construction," he said. "Concrete, steel, foundations." "You travel a lot?" she asked, hearing the background noise change from night to night. Sometimes the hum of a car engine. Sometimes the echo of a large, empty hall. "Yes," he said. "I have to oversee supply chains, make sure things arrive where they are supposed to." "It sounds stressful." "It is necessary." One Tuesday night, the conversation shifted. The air between them had grown thick with unspoken familiarity. Samantha was lying on her rug in the living room, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily. "What are you afraid of, Samantha?" Luca asked. He had learned her first name 3 days ago. He had not given her his. She simply called him L. "Spiders," she said lightly. "And forgetting to pay the electric bill." "Stop it," Luca said. His voice dropped an octave. "Tell me the truth." Samantha swallowed hard. She traced a pattern on the rug with her finger. "I'm afraid of being left behind," she whispered. "I am afraid that everyone I love ends up vanishing." Silence stretched over the line. It lasted so long she thought the call had dropped. "Loyalty is rare," Luca said finally. "Most people are only loyal to their own fear." "Is that why you are alone?" she asked. "I am not alone," Luca replied, his voice hardening. "I am surrounded by people every hour of the day." "That is not the same thing," she said softly. "You can be surrounded by 1,000 people and still be the only real person in the room." Luca did not answer immediately. In his study, he swirled the amber liquid in his glass. He looked at the papers spread out on his mahogany desk, photos of a rival gang's shipment routes, lists of payoffs, and reports on a suspected rat within his own organization. He was surrounded by soldiers, captains, and advisors, but she was right. He had not spoken a true word to any of them in 5 years. I loved someone once, Samantha confessed, her voice barely audible. He made me feel safe, but he was not who he said he was. When he left me with a mess I did not create. He betrayed me by not trusting me enough to tell me the truth. Luca's hand tightened around his glass until his knuckles turned white. He thought of his brother, Santino. He thought of the night Santino died, bleeding out in his arms because a man they had trusted sold them out for a seat at the table. 10 seconds passed. The silence was heavy, charged with the electricity of shared pain. Same, Luca said. The single word carried the weight of a confession. You were betrayed? Every day, Luca said. It is part of the job. Then quit the job, she said simply. Luca let out a short, dry sound that might have been a laugh. You cannot quit a foundation. Samantha, you are either holding up the building or you are crushed underneath it. Maybe you need a different building. Maybe. Another night. She was telling him about a customer who had demanded a refund because the sunflowers he bought had turned toward the sun too aggressively. The absurdity of the complaint made her giggle. It was a bright, cascading sound, unself-conscious and light. On the other end of the line, Luca was sitting in the dark. His tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck. On the desk in front of him sat a bottle of rare whiskey and a black Glock 19. He had spent the last 3 hours reviewing security footage, looking for the traitor in his ranks. His mind was a landscape of gray suspicion and red violence. Then he heard her laugh. It cut through the gloom like a knife. It was so ordinary, so devoid of agenda. Luca closed his eyes, the tension that lived permanently in his shoulders, the knot that sat at the base of his neck, loosened for a fraction of a second. The corners of his mouth lifted. It was a foreign sensation. He realized, with a start, that he was smiling. He reached out and touched the cold metal of the gun slide, then pushed it an inch away, as if the laughter on the phone and the weapon could not exist in the same space. Do that again, he said. Do what? Samantha asked, breathless. Laugh. I cannot just laugh on command. Elle, you have to be funny. I'm not funny, Luca said gravely. I know, she teased. You are very serious. You are like a storm cloud that learned how to use a telephone. Luca smirked. A storm cloud, he repeated. I have been called worse, usually sir or boss. I like storm clouds better. I like that you are the only person in the world who does not know who I am. He murmured. I know who you are, Samantha said firmly. You're the man who calls me at night to make sure the ghosts do not get me. Samantha found herself rushing through her days, ignoring the warning signs that life was getting complicated. She arranged bouquets with more care, humming to herself. She hurried home after closing the shop, checking her phone constantly, terrified she might miss the buzz. She did not know his name. She did not know his face. But she knew the cadence of his breathing and the way his voice softened when she talked about her brother. But while Samantha's world was expanding, Luca's was contracting. The suspicion within the Moretti crime family was no longer a theory. It was a fact. A shipment of narcotics had been intercepted by the police 2 nights ago, a shipment only 4 people knew about. Luca stood in the warehouse, the air thick with dust and the smell of diesel. His consigliere, Marco, stood beside him. Marco was an older man, sharp-featured and impeccably dressed, a remnant of Luca's father's era. It has to be someone close. Luca, Marco said, his voice low. Someone who hears what is said in the quiet rooms. Luca stared at the empty loading bay. I know. We need to sweep everyone, Marco suggested, his eyes scanning Luca's face. Check the phones. Check the logs. Does anyone have new habits? New contacts? Luca felt a cold chill slide down his spine. He had a new habit. He had a new contact, a woman in New Jersey with a soft voice and a fear of thunder. If anyone found out about Samantha, they would not see her as a person. They would see her as a lever, a way to pry Luca open and destroy him. Check the captains, Luca ordered, his voice flat. Leave my circle to me. I will handle my own security. Marco nodded, but his gaze lingered on Luca for a second too long. You look tired, boss. Distracted. I'm not distracted, Luca snapped. turning on his heel. "I am thinking." "Thinking is good," Marco said to Luca's retreating back. "But feeling gets men like us killed." That night, Luca did not call at 11. Samantha sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. She waited until midnight, then 1, then 2. The silence of the phone was louder than the storm had been. Doubts began to creep in, the old voices from her past telling her she was foolish, that men always left, that safety was an illusion. At 3 in the morning, the phone buzzed. She snatched it up instantly. "Hello? I cannot talk long," Luca said. His voice sounded jagged, like he had been shouting or drinking or both. "Is everything okay?" she asked, gripping the edge of the table. "No," he said. "My world is complicated. Samantha, there are bad things happening. Are you safe?" "I am never safe," he said. "But that is not why I called." "Why did you call?" "I needed to remember that there is something else," he said. "I needed to remember the flowers. You're scaring me." "Good," he said darkly. "You should be scared. The world is not a garden. Samantha, it is a slaughterhouse." "Then why do you call me?" she demanded, her fear turning into a spark of anger. "If it is a slaughterhouse, why do you keep calling the gardener?" There was a pause, a long, heavy silence where she could hear the faint click of a lighter and the exhale of smoke. "Because," Luca said, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a prayer, "you are the only thing that makes me want to wash the blood off my hands." He hung up before she could answer. Samantha sat in the dark, the dial tone humming in her ear, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She knew then that this was not just a game. She knew she was in trouble. But as she looked at the dark screen, she realized it was too late to run. She was already waiting for the next call. The morning sun offered no warmth to the gray skyline of New York City. Inside the Moretti penthouse, the air was colder than the streets below. Marco, the consigliere who had served Luca's father before him, stood by the window with his hands clasped behind his back. He was a man of sharp suits and sharper instincts, and today, his posture screamed tension. Luca sat at his desk, reviewing a ledger that did not add up. He did not look up when Marco spoke. "The Ricci family knows about the shipment in Newark," Marco said, his voice low and grave. "They knew the exact time the container hit the dock. They knew the guard shift." Luca stopped writing. He set his pen down slowly, the metal clicking against the mahogany. That schedule was finalized 6 hours before the ship arrived. Only 5 people knew it. "Then one of those 5 is talking," Marco said, turning to face his boss. "We have a leak. Luca, a bad one. And if they are selling us out to Ricci, they are not just looking for money. They are looking to take your head." Luca leaned back, his expression unreadable. Though a fire ignited behind his ribs, betrayal was the original sin in his world. It was the rot that brought down empires. "I will handle it," Luca said. "I will find the rot and I will cut it out." "Be careful, Luca," Marco warned, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Distractions make men careless, and lately, you seem elsewhere." Luca did not answer. He simply stared at Marco until the older man nodded and left the room. But Marco was right. Luca was elsewhere. He was thinking about a voice on the telephone and the smell of rain in a New Jersey suburb he had never visited. Across the river, the morning had started with a different kind of dread for Samantha. She was arranging a display of lilies in the window of her shop. The gilded petal. When her phone pinged, it was not the number she had grown addicted to seeing. It was a text from an old friend, Sarah, whom she had not spoken to in 2 years, not since the trouble with Danny. The message was short, chilling, and devoid of pleasantries. "People are asking questions again. Stay quiet about the past. Don't trust anyone new." Samantha stared at the screen, her blood turning to ice. The past was supposed to be buried. She had moved towns, changed her routine, and built a wall of silence around the year that had almost ruined her. She looked out at the street, suddenly feeling exposed behind the plate glass. Every passing car looked suspicious. Every pedestrian in a coat looked like a threat. She spent the rest of the day looking over her shoulder, jumping at the sound of the door chimes, By the time she closed up shop at 7 in the evening, she was exhausted from the adrenaline. She went home, locked the doors, and tried to breathe. But the feeling of unease lingered. At 2 in the morning, her phone rang. It was him. She answered before the first ring finished, desperate for the anchor of his voice. "Hello? You sound breathless," Luca said. I had a bad day," she stammered. "Tell me," he commanded gently. Before she could speak, a loud crash echoed from the electronic device in her hand, but it did not come from the phone speaker. It came from her own world. It was the sound of glass shattering. Distant but distinct, it was the sound of her shop's alarm screaming into the night. "Samantha?" Luca's voice sharpened instantly. "What was that? My shop!" she gasped, already moving toward the window, her hands shaking. "The alarm! Someone is at the shop!" "Do not go there," Luca ordered, his voice dropping into the tone he used for soldiers. "Lock your door. Stay inside." "I have to go," she cried, panic overriding reason. "It is my livelihood. I have to see." She hung up on him. It was the first time she had ever done so. 20 minutes later, Samantha stood in the center of the Gilded Petal. Surrounded by destruction, the front window was smashed, but it was not a robbery. The cash register was untouched. The computer was still on the desk. The violence was directed solely at the flowers. Vases were swept onto the floor. Heads of hydrangeas were ripped off and scattered like confetti. And in the center of the room, a massive bouquet of 24 red roses, her most expensive arrangement, had been trampled into the floorboards, the petals crushed into a red smear that looked disturbingly like blood. Her phone rang. She answered it, her hand trembling so violently she nearly dropped the device. They destroyed them," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "They didn't take the money. They just killed the flowers." On the other end of the line, Lucas stood in his penthouse, his hand gripping the phone tight enough to crack the casing. He heard the terror in her breath, the raw, shaking sound of a woman who had been violated by fear. A cold, lethal rage washed over him, a familiar companion, but this time it was protective. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice terrifyingly calm. "No," she wept, sweeping a pile of glass with her foot. "But why? Why would someone do this?" "Listen to me," Lucas said. "Go home. Lock the door. Do not leave your brother's side." "I am scared," she whispered. "I know," Lucas said. "I'm going to fix this." He did not tell her that he had already texted 3 of his best men. He did not tell her that within the hour, a black sedan would be parked down the street from her house, observing everything. He did not tell her that he was currently looking at a map of her neighborhood, calculating entry points and sight lines. He hung up and immediately dialed his head of security. "I want eyes on the girl in Jersey. If anyone gets within 50 yards of her door, put them in the ground." The next night, the conversation was different. The playfulness was gone, replaced by a heavy, somber intimacy. "Why did they do it, Samantha?" Luca asked. He needed to know. He needed to know if this was random malice or if his enemies had found her. Samantha hesitated. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, the events of the previous night playing on a loop. She realized she could not lie to him anymore. Not about this. "I testified," she whispered into the dark. 3 years ago. My ex-boyfriend, he was a courier. He delivered packages for people in the city. One night, he disappeared. The police came to me. They needed to know who his friends were, who he met with." Luca stopped breathing. "I told them what I knew," she continued, her voice hollow. "It was a minor case. Money laundering. They told me my name would be kept out of it. They told me the files were sealed. But after the trial, I started getting letters. Dead birds on my porch. So I moved here. I changed my number. I thought it was over." Luca closed his eyes. He knew the pattern. He knew the machinery of intimidation. She had brushed against the edge of his world, and the static shock was still burning her. "It is never over," Luca said softly. "Not when you speak against men like that. You sound like you know them," she said. "I know how the world works." He evaded. "I know that sealed files are just paper, and paper can be bought. I just wanted to do the right thing," she said, her voice small. The right thing gets you killed, Samantha, he said, the bitterness bleeding through. Only the smart thing keeps you alive. Is that what you are? She asked. Smart? I am alive, he replied. That is all that matters. He paused, his heart hammering a strange rhythm against his ribs. I want to see you. The request hung in the air between them, charged and dangerous. No, Samantha said quickly, though the word lacked conviction. You don't know me. You don't want to be part of this mess. I am already part of the mess, he countered. Let me see you. I can't, she whispered. If you see me, if you see how broken my life is, you will leave. Everyone leaves. Luca did not listen. 2 days later, a black town car idled 3 blocks away from the gilded pedal. Luca Moretti stepped out. He was not wearing his usual Italian silk suit. He wore dark jeans, a heavy wool coat, and a cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked like a dock worker, or a mechanic, someone rough, someone invisible. He walked down the street, the cold wind biting his face. He needed to see her. He needed to know if the image he had built in his mind matched reality. But there was a deeper reason, a darker reason rooted in his own trauma. As he approached the shop, the memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. 5 years ago, his older brother, Santino. Santino had fallen in love with a civilian, a waitress with a bright smile. The rival family had used her. They had captured her, tortured her just enough to make her scream into a phone, and Santino had run into the trap to save her. They butchered him in a warehouse while the girl watched. Since that day, Luca had sworn off softness. Civilians were liabilities. They were weaknesses that could be exploited. And yet, here he was, walking toward a flower shop in New Jersey because a woman with a trembling voice had told him she was afraid of thunder. He pushed the door open. A bell chimed. The scent of eucalyptus and roses hit him instantly, a smell so alive it made him ache. She was behind the counter. Samantha. She was smaller than he expected. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, strands falling across her face. She wore an oversized knit sweater that looked too big for her frame. She was looking down at a ledger, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she looked up, her eyes, hazel, wide and startlingly clear, locked onto his. Luca felt the air leave his lungs. She was real. She was not a ghost on a telephone line. She was flesh and blood and terrifyingly fragile. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was the same melody that haunted his nights, but she did not recognize him. Why would she? To her, he was a shadow, a disembodied protector. Here, he was just a tall man in a coat. "I need something for a grave," Luca said. The lie tasted like ash, but it was the only thing that felt true to his life. Samantha's expression softened instantly. "I am sorry," she said. She stepped out from behind the counter, moving with a grace that mesmerized him. Was it recent? "Long time ago," Luca rasped, keeping his voice low, altering the cadence to hide his identity. "My brother." She nodded, her eyes full of an empathy he did not deserve. She walked to a bucket of white lilies. "Lilies are for peace," she said, pulling one out and trimming the stem. "They say the soul is at rest." She handed him the flower. Her fingers brushed against his gloved hand. The contact was electric, searing through the leather. Luca flinched, pulling back slightly. "How much?" he asked. "Take it," she said softly. "For your brother." Luca stared at her. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to tell her that he was the man on the phone, that he was the monster who kept the wolves away, that he would burn the city down if anyone touched her. Instead, he nodded. "Thank you." He turned and walked out. He crossed the street and stood in the shadow of an awning, watching her through the glass. She went back to her work, unaware that the wolf was standing guard at her door. That night, the distance between them felt non-existent. Luca sat in his study, the single white lily sitting in a glass of water on his desk next to his gun. He had stripped off his tie. The whiskey burned his throat. "You sound different tonight," Samantha said. She was in bed, the covers pulled up to her chin. Restless. "I went for a walk today," Luca said. "I saw things." "What kind of things?" "Beauty," he said simply. and danger. They are usually the same thing. Samantha shifted in her bed, the rustle of sheets audible over the line. The sound sent a spike of heat straight to Luca's groin. "I am cold," she murmured. "The heating in this house is terrible." Luca closed his eyes, his hand gripping the armrest of his chair. "What are you wearing?" The question hung there, heavy and thick. It was a line crossed, a boundary dissolved. "A t-shirt," she whispered. "It is old, and gray socks. Is that all?" "Yes." Luca let out a slow breath. "If I were there," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly murmur, "you would not be cold." "No?" Her voice was barely a breath. "No. I would take the cold from you. I would wrap my hands around your waist. Are your hands cold?" "Yes," she gasped. "I would warm them," he said. "I would hold them against my chest. Then I would pull you closer. I can imagine it. Samantha, I can imagine the way your breath would hitch if I leaned in." "Elle," she warned, but it was a plea, not a stop sign. "I want to hear how you would sound if I kissed your neck," he said. The words were raw, stripped of all pretense. Right at the pulse point, where your heart beats the fastest, Samantha let out a sharp inhale, a sound that was half sob, half moan. She closed her eyes, her hand clutching the fabric of her shirt, imagining the ghost of his touch. She could feel the phantom weight of him, the smell of rain and expensive cologne, the rough stubble of a man she had never seen grazing her sensitive skin. "You," she stammered, her body trembling in the empty bed. "You sound like someone dangerous." "I am," Luca said. The confession was absolute. "I am dangerous. Samantha, I hurt people. I break things." "Is that why you haven't come to see me?" she asked. "Because you think you will break me?" "That is exactly why," he said. "I have not touched you because if I do, I will never let you go, and my world destroys everything I hold tight." "Maybe I don't want to be let go," she whispered. The admission shattered the last of Luca's resolve. He hung up the phone before he could do something reckless, like drive back to New Jersey and tear the door off its hinges to get to her. He sat in the silence of his empire, his heart racing like a man running for his life. He looked at the lily. He looked at the gun. He knew, with terrifying clarity, that the choice was no longer his to make. The collision was inevitable. The leak in his organization was growing. The threat to Samantha was rising, and he was falling in love with the one thing he could not save. The betrayal did not come with a shout or a gunshot. It came in the form of a ledger column that did not align. Luca Moretti sat in the silence of his study, the heavy oak door locked against the rest of the penthouse. The digital spreadsheet on his tablet was glowing in the dim light, illuminating the hard lines of his face. He had spent the last 3 nights tracing the flow of money through his organization, hunting for the leak that had compromised the Newark shipment. He had expected to find a low-level captain padding his pockets or a courier getting greedy. He had not expected to find Marco. The discrepancies were small, intelligent, and buried deep within the construction union payouts, Marco's specific territory. Over the last 6 months, nearly $500,000 had been siphoned off, redirected to shell accounts that Luca traced back to a holding company in the Cayman Islands. But it was not the theft that made Luca's blood run cold. It was the implication. Marco was not just his consigliere. Marco was the man who had taught him how to tie a tie, how to shoot a pistol, and how to bury his father. A knock on the door broke his concentration. Luca swiped the screen off, his hand instinctively drifting toward the drawer where he kept his gun. "Enter," he said. Marco stepped inside. He looked immaculate as always, his silver hair combed back, his suit pressed, but there was a tension in his shoulders that had not been there a week ago. He held a file folder in his hand. "We need to talk, Luca," Marco said, closing the door behind him. "We do," Luca agreed. He did not gesture for Marco to sit. "I was just looking at the union numbers." Marco did not flinch, but his eyes flickered toward the tablet. "The unions are stable. That is not why I am here. I am here because you are compromised." Luca leaned back, lacing his fingers together. "Am I?" "You're on that phone every night," Marco said, his voice rising slightly. "You disappear for hours. You leave meetings early. And now, I hear you have men stationed in New Jersey watching a florist. Do you think nobody notices? Do you think the Ritchie family won't find out? My personal life is not your concern, Lucas said, his voice deadly quiet. It is my concern when it becomes a weakness. Marco slammed the folder down on the desk. She is bait, Luca, or she will be. If you are distracted by a civilian, you are dead. And if you are dead, this family falls apart. Or perhaps, Lucas said, standing up slowly, his height filling the room. The family is falling apart because the people inside it are selling us out. The silence that followed was suffocating. Marco stared at him, his expression shifting from anger to a guarded calculation. Be careful what you accuse me of, Marco warned softly. I accuse you of nothing yet. Luca lied. He needed proof of the leak, not just the theft. He needed to know if Marco had sold the Newark shipment to Ricci. But if I find out that my consigliere is more interested in his retirement fund than his loyalty, the consequences will be biblical. Marco stiffened. I have served the Moretti name since before you were born. Do not forget that. I forget nothing, Luca said. Get out. Marco turned and left, but the air remained poisoned. Luca sank back into his chair. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a darkness that threatened to swallow him whole. He reached for his phone. He needed to hear her voice. He needed to remember that there was a world where trust was not a commodity to be sold. In New Jersey, Samantha Rowe was staring at a piece of paper that made her hands shake uncontrollably. The mail had come late that afternoon. Among the bills and flyers was a thick envelope with no return address. Inside was a letter from a collections agency she had never heard of, and a photocopy of a death certificate. Daniel J. Russo, deceased. Cause of death, ballistic trauma. Danny, her ex-boyfriend. He hadn't just run away. He had been murdered. She read the letter again, her breath catching in her throat. It detailed a loan Danny had taken out 2 weeks before he vanished, a loan for $50,000, co-signed with a forgery of her signature. The letter was not a standard legal notice. The language was aggressive, informal, and terrifying. The principal and interest are due immediately. Failure to pay will result in the reclamation of assets, starting with the business located at 14 Elm Street, her shop. Beneath the text, someone had handwritten a note in red ink. We know where you sleep. Samantha dropped the letter. The room seemed to spin. She backed away from the counter, bumping into a display of ceramic vases. The sound of them clattering together sounded like gunshots in her ears. She was not just a witness anymore. She was a target. The cryptic warning from her friend, the break-in, the destroyed roses. It was all connected to a debt she didn't owe, for a man who had died in a drug deal gone wrong. She fumbled for her phone. Her fingers were so slippery with sweat, she could barely unlock the screen. She didn't dial the police. The police hadn't helped her 3 years ago. They had only put a target on her back. She dialed the only number that felt safe. He picked up on the first ring. Samantha? He's dead, she choked out, tears streaming down her face. Danny is dead, Elle, and they say I owe them money. They said they know where I sleep. Who? Luca's voice was instant steel. Who sent the letter? I don't know, she sobbed. It doesn't have a name. Just a P.O. box. They want $50,000. I don't have that kind of money. They're going to hurt me. On the other end, Luca was already moving. He was out of his chair, grabbing his jacket, holstering his weapon. He signaled to his head of security, who was waiting in the hall. Listen to me, Luca said, his voice cutting through her panic like a lighthouse beam. Nobody is going to hurt you. Do you hear me? Nobody? You don't know that, she cried. You're just a voice on the phone. I am not just a voice. I am the man who is going to end this. He paused, and she could hear the sound of a car door slamming. Pack your things. Samantha. She froze. What? Pack a bag, he ordered. Close for 3 days. Nothing else. Leave your phone, leave your laptop. I can't just leave, she argued, panic flaring again. Leo is at school, my shop. I can't just run away with a stranger. You have to, Lucas said. If they send a letter, they are already watching the house. You are not safe there. I have a car 2 minutes away. A man named Benito. He will knock on your door. You go with him." "No," she whispered, backing into the kitchen. "No, this is crazy. I don't know you." "Samantha," Luca said. His voice broke, just for a fraction of a second, revealing a depth of fear that mirrored her own. "Please, trust me. If you stay there tonight, I cannot protect you. And if anything happens to you, I will burn this entire city to the ground. Do not make me do that." The raw honesty in his voice stopped her. This wasn't a predator trying to lure her out. This was a desperate man trying to pull her from the tracks of an oncoming train. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The ride was a blur of gray highway and rain. Benito was a giant of a man with a broken nose and hands the size of shovels. But he spoke to her with a surprising gentleness. He picked up Leo from soccer practice, explaining calmly that there was a security issue at the house, while Samantha sat in the back seat, clutching her bag to her chest. They drove for 2 hours, leaving the congestion of New Jersey for the wooded hills of upstate New York. The rain intensified, turning the world into a smear of charcoal and silver. Samantha didn't ask where they were going. She felt numb, suspended in a nightmare where the only reality was the memory of Luca's voice, promising safety. They arrived at a house set deep in the woods. It was not a cabin, but a modern structure of stone and glass, hidden from the road by a dense thicket of pines. It looked cold, fortress-like. "He will be here soon," Benito said as he unlocked the front door. "There is food in the kitchen. The boy can take the room on the left. You take the master." Benito stayed outside, standing guard in the rain. Samantha ushered a confused and sullen Leo into the bedroom, telling him to play video games and not to come out. Then she went into the living room and waited. The house was silent. It smelled of cedar and disuse. She wrapped her arms around herself, pacing the floor. Who was this man? What had she done? She had entrusted her life and her brother's life to a ghost. An hour later, she heard the sound of tires on gravel. Then, the heavy thud of a car door. The front door opened. Samantha stopped pacing. She stood by the fireplace, her heart hammering so hard it made her dizzy. A man stepped into the entryway. He was tall, taller than she had imagined. He shook the rain off a heavy black wool coat. His hair was dark, slicked back from the rain, and his face was a landscape of sharp angles and shadows. He looked exhausted. He looked dangerous. He looked up, and their eyes met. The air left the room. It was him. She knew it instantly. It wasn't just the intense, dark eyes. It was the way he looked at her, like a starving man looking at a feast he wasn't allowed to touch. "Samantha," he said. The voice was the same, deep, gravelly, the voice that had talked her to sleep. "Elle," she whispered. He closed the door and locked it. He walked into the living room but stopped 10 feet away from her, as if afraid to get too close. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Did Benito treat you well?" "Yes," she said. Her eyes traveled down his body. His coat was open. Beneath it, he wore a tailored suit, the shirt unbuttoned at the collar. And there, strapped to his chest in a leather holster, was a gun. She took a step back, her breath hitching. She had known, intellectually, that he was involved in something illegal. But seeing the weapon, a dull, black instrument of death resting against his ribs, made it real. "You have a gun," she said. Luca looked down at his chest, then back at her. He didn't cover it. "I told you I was in construction," he said, a bitter edge to his smile. "I construct endings." "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Really?" "My name is Luca Moretti," he said. He watched her face for a reaction. The Moretti name was infamous in the tri-state area, synonymous with organized crime, racketeering, and violence. Samantha's eyes widened. She knew the name. Everyone knew the name. "The crime family," she whispered. "Yes." You are the boss?" "Yes." She felt the instinct to run. This was the monster under the bed. This was the reason her ex-boyfriend was dead. This was the darkness she had spent her life avoiding. She took another step back, hitting the stone hearth of the fireplace. "I should go," she said. "I can't be here. You are everything I am afraid of." Luca flinched. as if she had struck him. But he didn't let her leave. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't grab her. He stopped inches away, his hands hovering in the air, terrified to make contact. "You can leave," he said roughly, "if that is what you want. I will have Benito drive you anywhere you want to go. I will pay your debt. I will make the threats stop. You never have to see me again." He looked down at her, his eyes burning with a desperate intensity. "But do not leave because you think I am a monster to you. I am a monster to everyone else, Samantha, but not to you." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his hands. His palms were rough, warm, and shaking slightly. "I didn't lie," he whispered, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I didn't lie about the way I feel." Samantha looked up at him. She saw the gun, yes, but she also saw the exhaustion in his eyes. She saw the fear. The man who ruled a criminal empire was trembling because he was terrified she would reject him. She raised her hand slowly and placed it flat against his chest, right over his heart. It was beating frantically, a chaotic rhythm against his ribs. "You're scared," she said softly. "Terrified," he admitted. "You kill people," she said, the reality still warring with the emotion. "I do, but you saved me. I would burn the world to save you," he vowed. The space between them collapsed. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was gravity. Samantha surged upward, and Luca bowed his head. Their lips met. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision of 2 desperate people trying to survive a storm. Luca groaned, a low, guttural sound, and his arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against his hard body. He tasted rain and whiskey and danger. Samantha gripped the lapels of his coat, pulling him closer, needing to feel the solid reality of him. He walked her backward until her shoulders hit the wall. The impact was jarring, grounding. He pinned her there with his body, his hips pressing against hers, his hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the kiss. It was hungry, possessive, and overwhelming. Samantha gasped for air, her senses overloaded. She could feel the cold metal of the gun against her side, a stark reminder of who he was. But his mouth was warm, his tongue sweeping into hers with a passion that made her knees buckle. Luca pulled back, just an inch, his forehead resting against hers. They were both panting, their breath mingling in the cool air of the house. His eyes were blown wide, the pupils swallowing the iris. "Tell me to stop," he rasped. "Samantha, tell me to stop." He was giving her the power. The man who commanded armies was begging for permission. She looked at him, the scar above his eyebrow, the harsh line of his jaw, the vulnerability in his gaze. She realized that she had been waiting for this since the first time he asked her about the rain. "Don't stop," she whispered. He didn't. He kissed her again, harder this time, his hands sliding down to grip her waist, his thumbs digging into her hips. She felt a jolt of desire so sharp it was almost painful. Her hands roamed over his shoulders, feeling the muscle beneath the expensive suit. But then, the fear flickered back. Not fear of him, but fear of the intensity. It was too much, too fast. She whimpered, a small sound of overwhelm. Luca froze instantly. He pulled back, his hands immediately loosening their grip. Though he didn't let go completely, he looked at her, searching her face for signs of distress. "Did I hurt you?" he demanded, his voice rough with panic. Samantha shook her head, trying to catch her breath. She reached up and touched his cheek. "No, it's just... you are so strong. You are so much." She looked into his eyes, seeing the violence he held on a leash, the capacity for destruction that lived inside him. "You could hurt me," she whispered. "If you wanted to. You could break me in half." Luca's expression crumbled. He leaned down, resting his forehead against her shoulder, surrendering to the truth of her words. "I know," he said into her neck. He pulled back to look at her again, his gaze fierce and absolute. "I know what I am, but listen to me, Samantha." He took her hand and kissed the knuckles, then the palm, then the wrist. "I would kill the world before I would let that happen," he swore. "I would turn this gun on myself before I let you come to harm. Do you understand?" Samantha nodded, And in that moment, in a safe house surrounded by dark woods, she believed him. She realized she had not just run away from danger. She had run straight into the arms of the most dangerous thing of all, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely safe. The safe house was a fortress of stone and glass, buried deep within a forest of pines that whispered in the wind. To Samantha, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. 2 days had passed since Luca had brought her here. 2 days of silence, of watching Leo play video games with the volume turned down low, of pacing the floorboards while Benito, the giant guard, stood stoically on the porch. It was late afternoon when the illusion of safety fractured. Samantha was standing by the kitchen window, filling a glass with water from the tap. The rain had paused, leaving the woods dripping and heavy with mist. She looked out past the gravel driveway, scanning the tree line. It was a habit she had developed since the threatening letter arrived, a constant, low-level paranoia that kept her muscles tight. She saw it. A flash of sunlight reflecting off metal. It was brief, gone in a heartbeat, but it was unnatural against the organic greens and browns of the forest. Then she saw the movement. A figure, dressed in camouflage, shifting position behind a thick oak tree 300 yards away. The glass slipped from her hand. It shattered in the sink, the sound sharp and violent. Samantha didn't bother cleaning it up. She scrambled for the burner phone Luca had left her. Her fingers shook so badly she misdialed the single pre-programmed number twice. On the third try, it connected. "Tell me you are safe." Luca's voice answered instantly. No greeting, just immediate vigilance. "There is someone in the woods," she whispered, pressing her back against the kitchen wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the cold tile. "I saw a reflection, a scope, or binoculars. They are watching the house." On the other end of the line, Luca Moretti stood in the center of a construction site in midtown Manhattan, surrounded by the noise of jackhammers and shouting foremen. In her words, the world around him went silent. The noise faded into a dull roar. "Are you sure?" Luca asked, his voice lethal and low. "Yes," she breathed. "I saw a man." "Stay away from the windows," Luca commanded. "Move Leo to the bathroom in the center of the hallway. No exterior walls. Do it now." "Luca, they found us," she cried softly. "You said this place was a secret." "It was," he said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Only 3 people knew the location of that safe house. Him, Benito, and Marco. "I'm coming," Luca said. "Do not hang up until you are in the bathroom." He signaled to his driver before he even finished the sentence. As he walked toward the car, his mind was a chessboard of disaster. If they were watching, they were waiting for a green light. They wanted leverage. They wanted him. "I'm sending a team to flank the woods," Luca told her, his voice steadying her across the miles. "But I need to draw their eyes away from you. I need them to think I am vulnerable somewhere else." He hung up and immediately dialed his second-in-command. "Prepare the jet," he ordered. "File a flight plan for Miami. Make it public. Make sure every rat in the city knows I am leaving town in an hour." It was a decoy, a desperate gamble to freeze the enemy in place, to make them hesitate while he secured the woman who had become the only thing that mattered. Luca arrived at the safe house 3 hours later. He did not come in a convoy. He arrived in a nondescript sedan, slipping through the service road that bypassed the main entrance. When he entered the house, the air was thick with tension. Benito gave a curt nod, signaling that the perimeter was secure for the moment. The watcher had retreated, likely spooked by the arrival of Luca's counter-surveillance team. Luca found Samantha in the hallway. She looked small, her face pale, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were trying to hold her own shattering pieces together. "Leo is asleep," she whispered as he approached. "He doesn't know." "Good," Luca said. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his suit jacket was wrinkled. "The threat is contained for tonight. My men are sweeping the woods." Samantha looked at him. Really looked at him. For weeks, he had been a voice. Then, he had been a savior in a storm. Now, standing in the dim light of the hallway, He was just a man carrying the weight of a war he had inherited. "Who are you really? Luca?" she asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a plea for the truth. "I told you," he said heavily. "I am a criminal." "That is a label," she countered, stepping closer. "That is not who you are. A criminal takes... You have done nothing but give. You saved me. You saved my brother." "I put you in danger," he corrected sharply. He began to unbutton his shirt, his movements jerky and frustrated. "You want to know who I am? Look." He pulled the white dress shirt open, exposing his chest. Samantha drew a sharp breath. His torso was a map of violence. There were fading bruises, old knife scars, and one jagged, puckered starburst of pink skin just below his collarbone. A bullet wound. It had missed his heart by inches. "This is who I am," Luca said, his voice devoid of pride. "I am a target. I am a collection of near misses. This bullet was meant for my father. I took it when I was 22. The scar on my side is from a knife fight in a kitchen when a deal went bad. This is the cost, Samantha. It is not romantic. It is ugly, and it hurts, and it ends in blood." He waited for her to run. He waited for the revulsion. Instead, Samantha reached out. Her hand trembled, but she did not pull back. She placed her palm flat against the scar on his chest, covering the violence with her warmth. "It must be lonely," she whispered, "carrying all this history on your skin." Luca stopped breathing. He looked down at her hand, then up at her eyes. There was no judgment there, only a profound, aching sadness that mirrored his own. "It was," he rasped, "until you called." She stepped into him. It was a surrender. She pressed her face against his unscarred shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, rain, musk, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. "I don't care about the scars," she said into his skin. "I care about the heart beating underneath them." Luca made a sound that was half groan, half prayer. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her slightly off the floor, burying his face in the curve of her neck. The restraint he had exercised for weeks, the carefully constructed walls of discipline, crumbled into dust. He carried her to the master bedroom. He kicked the door shut, shutting out the world of assassins and traitors. The room was dark, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the high windows. He set her down on the edge of the bed. He knelt before her, removing her shoes, his hands treating her ankles with a reverence that made her throat tight. "Are you sure?" he asked, looking up at her. His eyes were dark, searching. "Once I cross this line, Samantha, I cannot go back. I will belong to you." "You already do," she whispered. She reached down and pulled him up. The kiss was different this time. It wasn't the desperate collision of the living room. It was slow. It was a conversation without words. When they finally lay back against the sheets, the gun was left on the nightstand, cold and forgotten. Their intimacy was trembling and charged with a raw, terrifying vulnerability. Samantha cried softly when his skin touched hers, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being held by someone who would not let her fall. She traced the muscles of his back, her fingers digging in as he moved over her, shielding her body with his own. "You are not broken," he whispered against her ear, his voice rough with emotion. "You think you are shattered, but you are the strongest thing I have ever known." "I'm scared," she confessed, clutching him tighter. "I know," he said. "I have you. I have you." For the first time in years, Luca Moretti did not think about strategy. He did not think about the mole. He thought only of the woman in his arms, the softness of her skin, and the way she said his name like it was a benediction. Later. The rain returned. It drummed against the glass roof, a steady rhythm that usually soothed them both. But tonight, the silence after the storm was heavy. They lay tangled in the sheets. Samantha rested her head on his chest, listening to his heart rate slow. "I want a future," she said quietly. The words hung in the air. Luca tightened his arm around her. "You will have one. Not like this," she said. She pushed herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. Her hair fell around her face like a curtain. I cannot live waiting for the next text message. Luca, I cannot raise Leo in a safe house. I want a future where I don't have to check the tree line for snipers." She paused, her voice shaking. "I want a future with you, but not with the gun, not with the boss." Luca looked at her. He saw the hope in her eyes, and it terrified him more than any enemy. He realized then that he could not keep both his empire and his heart. He had to choose. "I will find a way out," he promised. The words felt heavy, momentous. "It will not be easy, and it will not be quick, but I will do it." "How?" "I have money," he said. "Accounts that the family does not touch. I can erase the debt they put on you. I can clear your name from every database. We can go somewhere they cannot find us. Europe or South." "Can you really leave?" she asked. "Do you think they will let you?" "They won't," Luca said grimly. "That is why I have to kill the past before we can leave." While Luca lay in the arms of the woman he loved, the past was already plotting his funeral. Marco sat in his study, a glass of vintage red wine on the desk. His phone sat in front of him. He had tracked Luca's movements. He knew about the decoy flight to Miami, but he also knew Luca hadn't been on the plane. He knew about the safe house. He picked up the phone and dialed a number that had been blocked on his caller ID for years. "He's at the cabin," Marco said when the line connected. "The girl is with him." On the other end, Matteo Ricci, the head of the rival syndicate, laughed. It was a dry, scratching sound. "Finally. You have done well. Marco." "The Moretti bloodline ends tonight. Just make it quick," Marco said, his voice devoid of emotion. "And the girl, she is innocent." "There are no innocents," Ricci replied. "She is his weakness. She dies first." The line went dead. 2 hours later, the perimeter alarms at the safe house did not sound. The system had been looped, but Luca had not survived 10 years at the top of the food chain by relying on technology alone. Benito, stationed on the roof with a thermal scope, saw the heat signatures moving through the brush. "Contact!" Benito's voice crackled over the radio on the nightstand. 6 tangos, approaching from the north. They are moving fast. Luca was out of bed before the transmission ended. He didn't panic. He moved with the terrifying efficiency of a machine. He pulled on his pants and grabbed the gun. "Stay down," he ordered Samantha, pushing her toward the heavy oak wardrobe. "Do not come out." "Luca, do not come out," he roared. He sprinted into the hallway just as the glass of the front door shattered. The firefight was brief, brutal and loud. Luca's security team, handpicked and loyal only to him, had been waiting in the shadows of the garage. They caught Ricci's assassins in a crossfire before they even reached the porch. Luca stood in the foyer, the smell of gunpowder stinging his nose. He watched as his men dragged the bodies of the attackers away from the door. He walked over to one of the assassins who was still breathing, barely. He knelt down, pressing the barrel of his gun to the man's knee. "Who sent you?" Luca asked calmly. The man spat blood. "Ricci." "Ricci doesn't know this house," Luca said. "Who gave him the address?" The assassin grinned, his teeth stained red. "The old man, the one in the suit." "Marco?" Luca stood up. He didn't shoot the man. He left him for Benito to handle. He walked back into the bedroom. Samantha was huddled in the corner, shaking. He went to her, pulling her into his arms, checking her for injuries. She was physically unharmed, but her eyes were wide with shock. "It is over," he said, smoothing her hair. "They are gone." "Who was it?" she asked. "A mistake," Luca said. His voice was cold, detached. "A mistake that I have to correct. The wine cellar of the Moretti estate was 50 feet underground. It was climate-controlled, smelling of earth and old oak corks. It was a place of refinement, of history." Marco was standing by a rack of 1990 Barolo when the heavy iron door creaked open. He didn't turn around. He knew who it was. "I assume they failed," Marco said, swirling the wine in his glass. "They are dead," Luca said. He walked down the stone steps, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous room. He was still wearing the clothes from the safe house, his shirt stained with mud and the blood of the man he had interrogated. "You always were hard to kill," Marco noted. He turned around. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had accepted his fate. "Why?" Luca asked. He stopped 10 feet away. He didn't have his gun drawn. He wanted to hear it. "Because you are soft," Marco spat, the facade of the loyal uncle cracking. "You fell in love with a florist. You are distracted. You are weak. The family needs a leader who is made of iron, not a man who writes poetry to a girl in New Jersey." "I was protecting the family," Luca said. "I was rooting out the corruption. I found the money you stole." Marco shrugged. "A retirement fund. I gave my life to your father. I deserved more than a pension." "You sold my brother." Luca realized, the pieces falling into place. 5 years ago. Santino. You told Ricci where he was." Marco didn't deny it. "Santino was reckless. He would have started a war we couldn't win. I did what had to be done to preserve the business." "It isn't a business," Luca said, his voice shaking with a rage so pure it felt like ice. "It was my blood." "And now you will kill me," Marco said. "And you will be alone, just like you always feared." "No," Luca said. He drew the gun from his waistband. "I won't be alone. I have something you never had. I have a reason to live." Marco raised his glass in a mock toast. "To love," he sneered. Luca raised the gun. His hand was steady. He looked at the man who had raised him, the man who had taught him the rules of this cursed world. He felt a tear slide down his cheek. Not for Marco, but for the boy he used to be. The boy who had trusted him. To the end. Luca whispered. He pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The glass shattered in Marco's hand. He fell backward, crashing into the racks of vintage wine. Bottles broke, sending rivers of dark red liquid spilling across the stone floor, mixing with the blood pooling around Marco's chest. Luca stood there for a long time, watching the wine flow. He holstered the gun. He turned and walked up the stairs, leaving the body in the dark. He had cut out the rot. But as he emerged into the night air, he knew the war wasn't over. Ricci was still out there, and now... Ricci knew that Luca Moretti had something worth dying for. The silence in the house was different now. Before, it had been the silence of waiting, of holding one's breath. Now, it was the silence of a tomb. Luca had returned from the estate in the early hours of the morning, smelling of sulfur and old wine. He had not told Samantha the details of what happened in the cellar with Marco, but he didn't have to. She saw it in the deadness of his eyes. She saw it in the way he scrubbed his hands in the kitchen sink, using scalding water and a rough brush, as if trying to remove a stain that went deeper than the skin. She stood in the doorway, watching him. Her bag was already packed, sitting by the door. Leo was still asleep in the back room, blissfully unaware that the walls around them were closing in. "Luca," she said softly. He stopped scrubbing. He turned off the water and leaned against the counter, his head hanging low. "I handled it," he said, his voice rough, like gravel grinding together. "Marco is gone. It won't stop, will it?" she asked. She walked across the kitchen, ignoring the instinct to keep her distance from the violence radiating off him. She placed a hand on his arm. The muscles beneath his shirt were rock hard, coiled with tension, killing him. It didn't fix this. It just made the hole bigger. Luca looked at her. For the first time, she saw true exhaustion in his face. Not physical tiredness, but a spiritual fatigue that had been accumulating for a decade. "Ricci knows," Luca said. "Marco told him everything before the end. Ricci knows you are the reason I am distracted. He knows where we are vulnerable." "Then leave," Samantha pleaded. She gripped his arm tighter, her hazel eyes searching for him. "Leave it all, Luca, the money, the territory, the pride. We can go. We can disappear. You promised me a future without guns. Let's start now." Luca looked at her, and for a moment, the desire to say yes was so overwhelming it nearly brought him to his knees. He wanted nothing more than to take her hand, drive west until the road ran out, and never look back. "I am ready," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I am done with this life. Samantha, I look at you, and I see the only thing worth saving." He pulled away gently, pacing the small kitchen. But we cannot just walk away. Not yet. If we run now, Richie will hunt us. He will send men to every corner of the earth. He's not a man who forgives, and he is certainly not a man who forgets a slight. I have to buy us freedom. How? A meeting, Luca said, the steel returning to his voice. I have called a sit-down with Richie, neutral ground. I will offer him the territory, the ports, the unions, the construction contracts, all of it. I will give him the Moretti Empire on a silver platter in exchange for one thing, safe passage for us. Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. He will kill you. No, Luca said, checking the magazine of his pistol before sliding it back into the holster. He is a businessman. Greed is the only language he speaks fluently. If I give him the crown, he won't care about the king. The meeting took place 2 hours later in an abandoned textile factory on the edge of the industrial district. The rain had returned, a relentless gray curtain that washed the grime of the city into the gutters. Luca stood in the center of the vast, empty floor. He was alone. He had ordered his men to stay back, a gesture of submission that chafed against his pride but was necessary for the parley. The metal doors groaned open. Matteo Ricci walked in, flanked by 4 armed guards. Ricci was a short, thick-set man with eyes like a shark, black, flat, and soulless. He wore a cashmere coat that cost more than Samantha's childhood home, but he wore it with the swagger of a street thug. Luca. Ricci smiled. His teeth yellowed from cigars. I heard you had a cleaning problem in your cellar. Marco was a good earner. A shame. He was a traitor, Luca said coldly. He got what traitors get. And now you want to talk peace. Ricci laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. You, the Lion of New Jersey, you want to surrender? I want out, Luca said, keeping his hands visible. I am offering you the keys to the kingdom. Matteo, the Newark docks, the union controls, the import routes, everything my father built. It is yours. Ricci stopped 10 feet away. He tilted his head, studying Luca with amused contempt. And what is the price for this generosity? I walk away, Luca said. Me and mine. No tails. No hits. We disappear, and you never say our names again, Ricci hummed, tapping his chin. It is a tempting offer. The Moretti Empire. Without firing a single shot. Take it, Luca said. Ricci's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. The problem, Luca, is that you have something else I want, or rather, someone... Luca went still. The air in the factory seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marco told me about her, Ricci sneered. The florist, the little civilian who makes the big bad boss weak in the knees. He said she's pretty. He said she makes you soft. Leave her out of this, Luca warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. How can I? Ricci stepped closer, invading Luca's space. You see, if I let you go, you might come back one day. You might find your courage again, but if I take her, if I break her while you watch, then I know you will never be a threat again. A man with a broken heart is no king. Ricci leaned in, whispering the next words like a secret. I think I will keep her. Maybe she can arrange flowers for my funeral one day. Or maybe she can just warm my bed after I put a bullet in your head. The rage that exploded inside Luca was white-hot and blinding. It took every ounce of discipline he possessed not to draw his weapon and empty the clip into Ricci's face. But he knew the 4 guards behind Ricci would cut him down before he hit the floor. And if he died here... Samantha was defenseless. He forced himself to breathe. He forced his hands to unclench. You have my offer, Luca said, his voice trembling with suppressed violence. Think about it. You can have the money, or you can have a war. But if you touch her, Matteo, I will not just kill you, I will pull your world down around your ears until there is nothing left but ash. He turned on his heel and walked away, expecting a bullet in the back with every step. Run, little lion, Ricci shouted after him. Run to your girl. I'll be seeing you both soon. Luca drove back to the safe house at 90 miles per hour, weaving through traffic, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The negotiation had failed. There was no truce. There was only the hunt. He burst through the front door of the cabin. Samantha was standing in the living room, Leo's backpack in her hand. She took one look at his face and knew. "We have to go," Luca said, grabbing the duffel bag by the door. "Now, he's not going to let us walk. He's coming for us." "I packed the car," Samantha said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She was not the same trembling woman who had answered the phone weeks ago. She had been forged in the fire of his world. "Leo is already inside." "Good girl," Luca breathed. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the exit. "We are going to the second safe house in the Bronx. It is small, off the grid. We switch cars there and head south." They ran into the rain. The storm had turned violent, the wind whipping the trees into a frenzy. Luca shoved Samantha into the passenger seat of the black SUV and jumped behind the wheel. They tore out of the driveway, gravel spraying behind them. They made it 5 miles before the nightmare caught up to them. They were merging onto the highway on-ramp when a heavy black truck slammed into their rear bumper. The impact was deafening. The SUV fishtailed, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. "Get down!" Luca roared, throwing his arm across Samantha's chest to pin her to the seat. Glass shattered as bullets raked the side of the car. The truck rammed them again, harder this time, spinning them around. Luca fought the wheel, his reflexes honed by years of survival, but momentum was against them. The SUV slammed into the concrete barrier, the airbag deploying with a cloud of white dust. For a second, there was only ringing silence. Then, the sound of doors opening, footsteps on the pavement. "Move!" Luca yelled. He kicked his door open, firing 3 shots blindly into the rain to suppress the approaching gunman. He grabbed Samantha, dragging her out of the wreckage. "Leo, move!" The teenager scrambled out of the back seat, terrified but moving. "The alley," Luca commanded, pointing toward a narrow gap between 2 industrial warehouses just off the highway service road. They ran. The rain was torrential now, blinding and cold. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets chipping the brick walls as they sprinted into the shadows. Luca stayed behind Samantha and Leo, firing back, counting his rounds. He was the shield, the barrier between the wolves and the lambs. They wove through a maze of garbage bins and chain-link fences. The city was a blur of gray and black. Samantha's lungs burned, her legs screaming with effort, but she didn't stop. She could hear the heavy footsteps of their pursuers splashing in the puddles behind them. "Keep going!" Luca shouted, his voice raw. "Don't look back!" They burst out onto a side street, flagging down a terrified cab driver. Luca didn't ask. He pulled the driver out, shoved a wad of cash into his hand, and pushed Samantha and Leo inside. He sped away just as the pursuing gunman rounded the corner. The second hideout was not a fortress. It was a dilapidated apartment above a mechanic's shop in the South Bronx, a place Luca kept for emergencies that required total invisibility. The heating rattled, the windows were grimy, and the furniture was covered in dust sheets, but it had a steel door and no electronic trail. Luca locked the heavy deadbolt and leaned his forehead against the metal, gasping for air. He was soaked to the bone, his expensive suit ruined, mud and blood splattered across his shirt. "Is everyone okay?" he asked, turning to face them. Leo was sitting on the floor, hugging his knees, shaking. Samantha was standing by the window, peering through the dirty blinds. She turned to him. There was a cut on her cheek from the shattering glass, bleeding sluggishly. "You're hurt," Luca said. The sight of her blood, her bright red blood on her pale skin, made him feel sick. He went to the bathroom, finding a first aid kit. He wetted a cloth and returned to her. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the rain and the tears she refused to shed. "I am sorry," he whispered, dabbing gently at the cut. "I am so sorry. Samantha, I promised you safety. I promised you a way out. You kept us alive," she said. She reached up, her fingers tracing the bruise forming on his jaw where the airbag had hit him. "You got us out of that car. You got us here. This isn't a life," he said bitterly. "Running through alleys like rats. This is not what you deserve. I don't care about what I deserve," she said fiercely. "I care about being with you." She took the cloth from his hand and dropped it to the floor. She stepped closer, pressing her wet body against his. The adrenaline from the ambush was fading, replaced by a desperate, aching need to feel alive, to feel something other than fear. "Luca," she whispered, "make me forget the sound of the guns." She kissed him. It tasted of salt and desperation. Luca groaned, a sound torn from the bottom of his soul. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her up, carrying her to the dusty mattress in the corner of the room. He didn't care about the grime. He didn't care about the storm raging outside. He cared only about the heat of her skin and the beat of her heart. They shed their wet clothes frantically, tossing them aside. When skin touched skin, it was electric. Luca moved over her, his hands roaming her body, checking for broken bones, affirming that she was whole, that she was real. "If we die," she whispered, pulling him down to her, her legs wrapping around his waist. "If they find us, I want it to be in your arms. I want the last thing I feel to be you." "We are not going to die," Luca swore against her lips. "I will not let death take this. Not now." They made love with a wild, frantic intensity. It was not gentle. It was a reclamation of life in the face of imminent destruction. The rain pounded on the roof, a deafening drumbeat, but inside the room, the only sounds were their gasps and the friction of skin on skin. Samantha clutched his back, her nails digging into his shoulders, anchoring him to the earth. She cried softly, the tears mixing with the sweat on her face. It was a release of all the terror, all the hope, all the love she had been holding back. Luca buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent. He moved with a rhythm that was both a plea and a promise. He worshipped her body, treating every inch of her as holy ground for a man who had known only violence. This absolute, unguarded vulnerability was a revelation. When the crest came, it shattered them both. They clung to each other, trembling under the thin, damp sheet, their breathing harsh in the quiet room. Luca rolled onto his side, pulling her against his chest. He smoothed her damp hair back from her forehead. He looked at her face, illuminated by the street lamp outside, and felt a surge of love so powerful it terrified him. "You are the only softness I have ever known," he whispered into the darkness. "Everything else in my life turned to poison. Everything else was sharp edges and betrayal. But you are the only thing that remains real." Samantha rested her hand on his heart. It was beating slower now, steady and strong. "We will make it. Luca, we will get out." "Yes," he said. But as he stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows dance, he knew the truth. Ricci would not stop. The attack on the highway was just the beginning. Across the city, in the opulent warmth of a private club, Matteo Ricci smashed a crystal glass against the wall. "They missed!" he screamed, turning on the leader of his hit squad. "2 cars, 4 shooters, and you let them slip into an alley?" "He is fast, boss," the man stammered. "He drives like a maniac, and he shoots back." Ricci paced the room, his face purple with rage. He had humiliated Luca. He had taken his territory, but Luca was still breathing, and as long as Luca Moretti was breathing, Ricci was not safe. "He's hurt," Ricci muttered. "He's scared. He's running with a woman and a kid. He will be looking for a hole to hide in." He turned to his lieutenant. "Call everyone, every soldier, every freelancer, every street rat who wants to make 50 grand. I want a grid search of the city. I want every safe house, every motel, every dark corner turned inside out." Ricci walked to the window, looking out at the storm. Lightning flashed, illuminating his reflection. "He thinks he can run through the rain," Ricci whispered. "But the storm drowns everyone eventually." "Send the final team. Burn the Bronx down if you have to. I want his head on my desk by morning." The air in the Bronx hideout was stale, heavy with dust and the lingering scent of fear. Luca stood by the window, peering through the cracks in the blinds. The storm outside had not broken. It had only paused to catch its breath. The sky was a bruised purple, swollen with rain that was threatening to drown the city again. Luca turned back to the room. He had just received a text on his secure line. It was a single code word from one of the few captains he still trusted. It meant that the passports were ready. It meant that the exit route was open, but it also meant he had to physically retrieve them from a contact in Queens. He checked his watch. It would take him 40 minutes to get there and back. 40 minutes of leaving Samantha vulnerable. He walked over to where she sat on the edge of the mattress. She was cleaning the small cut on her cheek, her movements slow and mechanical. Leo was in the other room, finally asleep, exhaustion having claimed him. "I have to go," Luca said. The words tasted like ash. Samantha looked up, panic flaring in her eyes instantly. She stood up, reaching for him. "No, you can't leave. You said we were staying together." "I have to get the papers," Luca explained, gripping her shoulders hard. "Without them, we cannot cross the border. We cannot disappear. I am meeting the forger in Queens. I will be back in less than an hour." "It's too dangerous," she argued, her voice rising. "It is the only way," he insisted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a black burner phone. He pressed it into her hand. It was warm from his body heat. "Listen to me carefully. Samantha, this phone is untraceable. I am the only number programmed into it." She looked at the device, then at him. "If they come," Luca said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper, "if you see a car, if you hear a noise, if you even feel like something is wrong, you call me. I don't care what I am doing. I don't care who I am talking to. I will come. Luca, promise me," he demanded. "You call, and you keep the line open." "I promise," she whispered. He kissed her hard, a kiss that felt like a seal on a contract. Then he turned, unlocked the heavy steel door, and slipped out into the gray afternoon. 20 minutes later, the sky opened up. The rain did not fall. It hammered the earth. Thunder shook the foundations of the old mechanic's shop, rattling the windows in their frames. Samantha sat in the corner of the living room, her knees drawn to her chest, the phone clutched in her hand so tightly her knuckles were white. Every sound made her jump. The wind howling through the alley sounded like screaming. The groan of the building settling sounded like footsteps. Then she heard it. It was not the wind. It was the distinct metallic screech of a crowbar against the steel door downstairs. Samantha's heart stopped. She scrambled to her feet. She ran to the back room and shook Leo awake. "Hide!" she hissed, pushing the groggy teenager toward the fire escape window. "Go up! Go to the roof! Do not make a sound!" "Sam? Go!" she screamed in a whisper. She shoved him out onto the wet metal grate and slammed the window shut, locking it. She turned back to the room. She could hear heavy boots on the stairs. They were coming up. There was no way out for her. The front door was the only exit, and they were already in the hallway. She retreated into the bathroom, the only room with a locking door. She slid the bolt home and backed into the corner, sliding down until she was wedged between the toilet and the bathtub. The room was dark, smelling of mildew. She dialed the number. It rang. One ring. Outside. The apartment door crashed open. Wood splintered. Men shouting. 2 rings. "Search the rooms. Find the boy, too," a voice roared. It was not Richie. It was a hired muscle. Professionals. 3 rings. "Pick up," she sobbed quietly, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Luca, pick up." The bathroom doorknob jiggled violently. Then a heavy boot slammed against the wood. The door shuddered but held. 4 rings. "He isn't answering," she whispered to the darkness. The despair crashed over her, colder than the rain. He had left. He was gone. The reality of her life, the abandonment, the loss, was happening all over again. In a dim back room of a bakery in Queens, Luca sat across from a nervous little man holding a manila envelope. "The pictures are good," the man was saying, sweating despite the cold. "I changed the birth dates. You are Canadian citizens now." Luca's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. It was her. He reached for it, his hand hovering. But at that exact moment, the bakery door opened. 2 uniformed police officers walked in, laughing, shaking off their umbrellas. They looked directly at the back room. The forger froze. "Don't answer that," he hissed. "If it rings again, they look over here. We are doing a deal." Luca ignored him. He snatched the phone up and pressed it to his ear. "Samantha? For a second, there was only static and the sound of wood splintering in the background. "I thought you'd hang up," her voice whispered. It was small, broken, and terrified. "They are here. Luca, they are at the door." The world stopped. The police, the forger, the passports, it all dissolved. Luca did not say a word. He did not tell her to be brave. He did not waste a single second on reassurance. He dropped the phone. It hit the table with a clatter. Luca was already moving. He vaulted over the table, ignoring the shout of the forger. He burst out the back exit into the alleyway, his lungs already drawing in massive gulps of air. His car was 3 blocks away. Traffic in Queens was a gridlock of red taillights and honking horns. He didn't go to the car. He ran. He hit the sidewalk in a dead sprint, his leather shoes slamming against the wet pavement. He ran into the street, weaving between stalled cars, vaulting over the hood of a taxi that honked at him. He didn't feel the rain soaking his shirt. He didn't feel the cold. He felt only a burning, singular drive that consumed his entire existence. He ran like a man possessed. He ran past the subway station, realized it would be too slow, and kept running. He crossed the bridge on foot, the wind threatening to blow him into the river below. His chest burned, his muscles screamed, but he saw only her face. He heard only her whisper, "I thought you'd hang up." "Never," he grunted through clenched teeth, pushing his body past the limit of endurance. "Never." Samantha curled tighter into a ball. The bathroom door was splintering. A hole appeared in the wood near the lock. A hand reached through, fumbling for the bolt. "Found you, sweetheart," a voice sneered from the other side. She closed her eyes. She thought of the flowers in her shop. She thought of the way the sun hit the linoleum in her kitchen. She thought of Luca's heartbeat against her palm. "I love you," she whispered into the dead phone line. The bolt slid back. The door swung open. A man stood there. It was huge, wearing a tactical vest and a mask. He raised a suppressed pistol. "Time to close the shop," he said. Then, a shadow moved in the hallway behind him. There was a sound, wet, heavy, and sickening. The gunman's eyes went wide. He dropped the gun. He gurgled, looking down to see a hand, a bare, bloodied hand, punching through his tactical vest, driving a piece of broken door frame into his side. No, it was a knife. Luca's knife. The man fell forward. Luca stood in the doorway. He looked like a demon risen from the ocean. He was drenched, his clothes clinging to his frame like a second skin. His chest was heaving violently, gasping for air. His eyes were black holes of violence. There were 2 other men in the hallway. They turned, raising their weapons. Luca didn't stop. He stepped over the falling body of the first assassin. He moved faster than humanly possible, fueled by a rage that transcended adrenaline. He slapped the barrel of the nearest rifle aside, grabbed the man's throat, and crushed it with a single, sickening squeeze. The third man fired. The bullet grazed Luca's shoulder, spinning him around. Luca didn't even flinch. He drew his own weapon, the Glock he had retrieved from his waistband mid-sprint, and fired twice. Bang, bang, headshots. Both men dropped instantly. Silence returned to the apartment, broken only by the sound of rain and Luca's ragged breathing. He holstered the gun. He stepped into the bathroom. Samantha was pressed into the corner, her eyes squeezed shut, her hands over her ears. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Luca fell to his knees. He didn't care about the blood on the floor. He crawled to her. He reached out, his hands trembling, and touched her hair. "Samantha," he choked out. She flinched violently, letting out a small scream. "It is me," he said. "It is me. Look at me." She opened her eyes. She saw him. He was water and blood and terror, but he was there. "You came," she whispered. "You said not to hang up," Luca said, his voice breaking as he pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "I never will. I will never hang up on you." He held her as if he were trying to absorb her shaking into his own body. He checked her arms, her face, desperate to find any injury. When he found none, he collapsed against the wall, pulling her onto his lap. "The police," she whispered. "I hear sirens." Luca listened. Yes. In the distance, rising above the storm, was the wail of approaching sirens. He had called them, miles back, while running across the bridge. He had made the anonymous tip that would end his life as he knew it. "They are coming," Luca said. He looked at her, his eyes clear and full of a heartbreaking peace. "This ends tonight, Samantha. No more running, no more shadows." "What do you mean?" "They will take me off," he said. "I will surrender. I have evidence. I have the ledgers. I will give them Ricci. I will give them everything in exchange for your safety." "No," she cried, gripping his soaked shirt. "They will put you in prison. I won't see you." "You will be safe," he said firmly. "That is all that matters. I promised you a future without guns. This is the only way to give it to you." The sirens were outside now. Blue and red lights flashed against the bathroom tiles. Luca stood up, pulling her with him. He kissed her forehead. It was a long, lingering kiss, a goodbye wrapped in a blessing. "Walk outside," he instructed. "Keep your hands up. Tell them you are a hostage. Tell them nothing else. Do not look back. Luca, please, go," he commanded gently. He pushed her toward the door. Samantha stumbled into the hallway. She looked back once. Luca was standing amidst the carnage, his hands raised, his head high. He looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, he smiled. It was a true smile, the smile of a man who had finally paid his debt. She walked out into the rain. The police swarmed the building. She was wrapped in a blanket, questioned, and led away. She didn't look back as they brought him out in handcuffs. She didn't look back as the heavy doors of the police van closed, but she knew he was watching her. 6 months later, the cemetery was quiet. The spring grass was a vibrant, impossible green. Samantha Rowe knelt before a modest headstone. It belonged to her parents. Beside it was a smaller marker she had placed for Danny, a forgiveness she finally felt ready to give. She placed a bouquet of white lilies on the grass. She had reopened her shop 2 months ago. It was smaller now, in a different town, under a different name. Leo was in a new school, playing soccer, laughing again. The debts were gone. The threatening letters had stopped. The Moretti crime family had been dismantled, its leadership incarcerated or turned witness. Matteo Ricci was serving 3 consecutive life sentences. His empire crumbled by the testimony of his greatest enemy. Samantha stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees. She walked back to her car, a sensible sedan parked under an oak tree. She sat in the driver's seat and checked her watch. It was noon on the first Sunday of the month. Her phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. It always was. Samantha's heart did a familiar flip in her chest. She answered it, bringing the phone to her ear. "Hello?" she said. There was a pause, then a voice. It was deep, wrapped in sandpaper and distance, but it was the voice that had saved her. "Still here," Luca said. He was somewhere far away. Witness protection had relocated him to a place where the mountains met the sky, a place where he worked with his hands and saw no violence. He could not tell her where. He could not see her, not yet, maybe not for years. But he called, once a month, for 30 seconds. He was allowed to confirm he was alive. Samantha closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the headrest. She smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached her eyes. "I know," she replied. "Are the flowers blooming?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "The lilies are beautiful this year." "Good," he said. "Is the door locked?" "Always. I miss the rain," he said softly. "I know," she whispered. "It rains here too." The line clicked dead. The connection was severed, but the tether remained. Samantha put the phone down, started the engine, and drove out of the cemetery. She wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. She knew that, somewhere, thousands of miles away. A man was looking at the sky and thinking of her. And one day, when the storm had fully passed, he would come home. "Thank you so much for listening to this story. I thought you'd hang up," she said. "It has been an incredible journey writing Luca and Samantha's story with you, exploring how love can bloom even in the darkest of storms. I would love to know, where are you listening from today? Did the ending make you cry? Or were you happy to see them find a way to be safe? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more emotional, intense, and realistic tales of love and danger, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a chapter. Until next time, keep listening.